Thanks, Felicia. Are we properly set up? The documents are not here. Could you allow me to delay for 5 minutes so that when I present, the media must have reference. It's very important. They help us to communicate to the public and to the world. So 5 minutes delay would not harm. The embargo is lifted at 11:30. Special day in the history of South Africa. 30 years ago, the child of the soil, Nelson Mandela, who would later become the first democratically elected president of South Africa, was released from prison after having spent about 3 decades. And amongst other things that he said on that day in his speech is that our march to freedom is irreversible. Now, freedom entails a lot of things, including for people to be able to find jobs, to express themselves in the way they want to express themselves. And freedom for us in statistical practice entails the ability to measure what is happening in society with integrity, with such independence. So we bring to you the Quarterly Labor Force Survey, Q4 of 2019. The unemployment rate of South Africa for Q4 2019 remains unchanged from Q3 of 2019. That is, it's sitting at 29.1%. And of course, we can actually look that there was no change recorded in the unemployment rate between Q3 and Q4 indeed, and we can see the fluctuations that are happening. Let us go straight to what happened about a decade ago. We see an increase by 5 percentage points from about a decade ago, and by 4.8 percentage points from about 5 years ago, and indeed by 2 percentage points from a year ago. As of this time that we are reporting on, a year ago, unemployment rate was 27.1%, and currently it's sitting at 29.1%. Excuse me, apparently there's an embargo that has been broken. Power FM, so please delete that tweet instantly. Please delete that tweet instantly. It's just irregular.
Is there anyone representing Power FM? Has anyone filed?
So how comes? Can we then follow up on that while I do the presentation? Sitting at 29.1%, represents in absolute numbers 6.7 million persons. And of course, those that are employed are 16.4 million, accounting for 22.1 million, 23.1 million for those that are economically active or in the labor force. And for those that are not economically active, other non-economically active are 12.7 million, but those that are the discouraged work seeker are 2.9 million. Now, let us go straight into what has happened. What are the gains? What are the losses? We are saying that in terms of other not economically active as well as the employed, increased by 45,000 persons quarter on quarter, while the discouraged work seekers increased by 62,000 persons quarter on quarter. And indeed, the unemployed decreased by 8,000 people quarter on quarter. Let us look at the employment and the labor markets in general. We are saying that over the last decade, we have seen an increase in employment by 2.4 million persons. Over the last 5 years, by 1.1 million persons. And of course, over the last year, by 108,000 persons. And indeed, quarter on quarter, we have seen an increase of 45,000 people. We want to look at the labor force participation rate and compare it with the absorption rate. We understand that the labor force participation rate is the proportion of the working age population that is either employed or unemployed, whereas the absorption rate is the proportion of the working age population that is employed. And we are saying that the labor force participation rate as the fourth quarter in 2019 was sitting at 59.8%, whereas the absorption rate, we were sitting at 42.4%, and we have a gap of about 17.4 percentage points. The more the gap widens, the more the challenges are in the labor markets. If it narrows, it shows that we are actually making progress between those that are employed and those that are actively looking for employment. And of course, that gap should always narrow. Let us look at the unemployment rate in relation to levels of education. While unemployment rate for the fourth quarter of 2019 is sitting at 29.1%, at the same time, those with less than matric were sitting at 34%, and that had seen an increase of 0.02 of a percentage point. We can see when we compare that with those who are graduates that they are sitting at an unemployment rate of 7.6%. And of course, this decreased by 0.6 of a percentage point. Now, when we look at this, it explains that education, does assist in our people being able to net employment. In all those categories where the absorption rate seems to be increasing, it's only when, as well as the labor force participation rate, it's only when they have attained higher levels of education. The lower levels of education, as we can see, the absorption rate as well as the participation rate are actually lesser. Let us look at age cohorts. Unemployment rate for those aged 25 to 34 is sitting at 35.6%, and it's more than double that of those that are aged 45 to 54 years. When we go even further to look at those aged 15 to 24 years, we see that their unemployment rate is sitting at 58.1%. So the younger the people, the higher the unemployment rate. But generally, young people are vulnerable to labor markets. And we can see that the absorption rate for those aged 15 to 24 years is sitting at 11%, whereas their labor force participation rate is sitting at 20.2%. Furthermore, let us look at those that are aged 15 to 24 years and compare them with other age cohorts. We can readily see that in that age category of 15 to 24 years, those that are with less than matric have broken the 60% barrier. They are sitting at 61.8% of unemployment rate. And those that are graduates at the same age cohort, are sitting at 24.6%. So again, we see the importance of education in terms of the ability of our people to be able to find employment. Whereas when we look at those aged 35 to 64 years, we can see that those with less than matric are sitting at 25.1% unemployment rate, and those that are graduates are sitting at 4%. And again, education runs that narrative. Let us look at the profile of those not in employment, education, and training, the NEET. We are saying that those not in employment, education, and training of the age cohort 15 to 24 years, firstly, those in that age category, before we look at where they are or where they are not, they are actually sitting at 10.3 million. Then those that are not in employment, education, or training are sitting at 3.3 million persons. And that 3.3 million persons out of 10.3 million persons accounts for 32%. And of course, the female cohort in this group of the NEET are most affected, as we can see that they are sitting a lot more higher at 33.7%, and they have actually gone up, having coming out of the previous quarter. Now, because of youth formations and their interests, youth formations in South Africa usually ask us, tell us more even beyond your age 24. So we will come to talk to that about that later. But for now, let us look at the provinces. In terms of the provinces of those not in employment, education, and training, we are saying that the Northern Cape is leading at 37%. It's followed by the Northwest and Mpumalanga, which sit at 36.6% and 36.5%. And right at the bottom are Gauteng and the Western Cape sitting at 28.6% and 26.2% respectively. And of course, the Northern Cape leading the pack in terms of those not in employment, education, and training is actually has increased from the previous quarter by 1.6 percentage points. Now, let us look at those that are aged 15 to 34 years. In the country, in the fourth quarter of 2019, those aged 15 to 24 years were 20.4 million. And out of those, 8.2 million young people were not in employment, education, and training. And of course, they account for 40%, 40.1% to be exact. And again, we see that the females are much more vulnerable, sitting at about 43.9%, and of course having increased from the previous quarter by 1 percentage point. When we unpack that in relation to the provinces, we can see that the Eastern Cape is sitting at 44.9%, having seen a decrease of 1.8 percentage points. It's followed by the Northwest, which has increased by 3.2 percentage points to 44.1%. And of course, again at the bottom, Gauteng and the Western Cape. Let us look at employment. We can see that formal sector, non-agricultural, has increased quarter on quarter by 117,000 jobs. And again, informal sector, non-agriculture, has decreased by 77,000 jobs. We have seen an increase in agriculture by 6,000, and private households have remained unchanged quarter on quarter. And when we look at these sectors, we can see that generally trade, construction, and agriculture, as you can see, their blue lines surpass the gray segment, have always created more employment than their share in the nominal GDP. Now, let us look at the sectors quarter on quarter, year on year. Let us look, for example, at manufacturing. Manufacturing, quarter on quarter, has lost 39,000 jobs, whereas when we look at it year on year, it has lost 46,000 jobs. We can see that community service and finance, quarter on quarter, as well as transport, have gained employment, as well as year on year, community service remains having gained employment 168,000, followed by transport and agriculture. Now let us go back to the sectors again. We can see quarter on quarter, community service has gained 113,000 jobs, mainly in the sewer services and refuse removals, as well as in sporting and other activities. We can see that in finance, business activities not elsewhere classified, as well as monetary intermediation, have increased, have contributed largely to the increase of employment quarter on quarter. That is 76,000 quarter on quarter. Transport has benefited 36,000 jobs quarter on quarter. Other land transport, postal and related services, as well as telecommunications, have contributed to this increase. In construction, we have seen an increase of 12,000 in the building completion in the building of complete construction, as well as in other building activities. Now, where did we record the losses? In trade, we see that we have lost 155,000 jobs, mainly in the retail trade, not in stores, as well as not specific retail trade in stores. And of course, in manufacturing, we have seen job losses of 39,000. And those are usually in the production, processing, and preservation, as well as printing and services activities. And here in manufacturing, we have seen manufacturing consistently losing jobs. So there is depression on manufacturing in relation to job losses. We can see that in utilities, particularly in the production, collection, and distribution of electricity, as well as in the collection, purification, and distribution of water, we have lost 14,000 jobs. About 30%, a third, 29.1% to be exact, of all our people are employed in elementary and domestic work occupations. Let us look at those that are in the formal sector versus those that are in the informal sector. By the fourth quarter of 2019, those in the informal sector were accounting for 2.9 million, whereas those in the formal sector were 11.3 million. Let us continue with unemployment. We are saying that of the 6.7 million persons, 73.3% have been in long-term unemployment, meaning that they have been unemployed for a year or more. Let us look at the expanded definition. when we look at the expanded definition, we are talking about the 6.7 million people that are unemployed who account for the 29.1%, which is the formal definition of employment, and or the narrow definition, and in our case, the official one that we have adopted as a country. When we look at those 6.7 million, and we look at the discouraged work seeker, that is 2.9 million, plus another 900,000 who had other reasons for not taking up employment, we come to 10.4 million people who are unemployed in the expanded definition. And that accounts for 38.7%. And out of that, females are much more vulnerable, as they sit at 42.4% in the expanded definition compared to their male counterparts who are sitting at 35.5%. When we look at population groups, we can see that the black Africans are actually leading with unemployment rate, followed by the coloreds, followed by the Indian Asians, followed by the whites. When we compare the two, just looking at the 29.1% for the nation, we can see that black Africans are sitting at 32.4%. And when you compare them with the colored population group, you can see that they are sitting at 24.9% and 13.9% for the Indian Asians, and 7.6% for the white population group. It's even worse for the females, because the females have actually broken your more than 30% unemployment rate, sitting closely, when they are black African, sitting closely to about 35%. That is at 34.9% to be exact. So there are a few percentage points above the national average, because the unemployment rate at national average is sitting at 31.3%. And of course, when you compare the black African woman, who is sitting at 34.9%, with a white woman unemployment rate, they are sitting at 8.5%. It shows quite some disparities. Now, let us look further. And as we look further, we want to look at the expanded definition. And in the expanded definition, generally, young people, youth and women are vulnerable to labor markets. It's even worse when they are black, as in Indian, African, and colored. But for the black African female on expanded unemployment rate, they are sitting at 46.8% compared to the national average at 42.4%. And when you compare them with their colored counterparts, they are sitting at the colored counterparts are sitting at 31.4%, which is actually more than 10 percentage points of a difference. And the Indian Asians are sitting at 25.6%, and the white women are sitting at 10.5% of the expanded definition. Let us look at provinces. Our provinces are demonstrating different behaviors with unemployment. The Eastern Cape has always had the highest unemployment rate, official unemployment rate, currently sitting at 39.5%. It's actually sitting at more than 10 percentage points from the national average. The national average is 29.1%, and of course, we can see the difference. It is followed by the Free State, sitting at 35%, and of course, followed by Mpumalanga and Gauteng. And right at the bottom are Limpopo and the Western Cape. When we look at the expanded definition, one of the things that we are seeing here with Limpopo, Limpopo on official definition always returns the lowest unemployment rate, but this time it has overtaken the Western Cape, meaning that when you compare that with the expanded definition, we can see that a lot more people have moved out of the discouraged work seeker in Limpopo to go and actively look for employment, while still your discouraged work seekers still remain high, because your unemployment rate official for Limpopo is 23.1%, whereas their expanded definition is sitting at 44%. Still, sitting at 44%, it's still lower than that of the Eastern Cape, which is sitting at 47.3%. Now, what is happening to the economically not active? We are saying that out of the 15.6 million people who are not economically active, about 40% of those were students, 16.5% were homemakers, and of course those who were ill or indicated that because of disability they couldn't work were 9.6%, and the discouraged work seekers are sitting at 18.3%. Let us conclude. We are saying that the unemployment rate for the fourth quarter of 2019 is sitting at 29.1%. It remains unchanged from the third quarter of 2019, whereas there has been movements in terms of gains of employment and unemployment. But let us look at the employment gains, particularly in the services. There were 113,000 jobs created. And in trade, there were 159,000 jobs lost. And those not in employment, education, or training are sitting at 32%. And of course, the unemployed have decreased by 8,000 people quarter on quarter. I thank you very much. The next slide is blank.
Thank you, SG. We'll open the floor for questions. You noted? You are noted. You are noted.
Rate. So the official unemployment rate remained the same, but the expanded unemployment rates increased marginally. Can you just help me understand how that works and why that happened?
Okay, we'll take another question, if there is. Mfuneko?
Morning, Mfuneko from Reuters News. I wanted to ask, what are the common characteristics between the three provinces with the highest unemployment rates? And are you able to say what those common features suggest about the nature of unemployment? Thanks.
Okay, back to the panel.
Let us look at the official unemployment rate, which remains at 29.1%. Quarter on quarter, we have seen a decrease of 8,000 jobs. And out of those, even when the decrease has occurred, we understand that if there are other people who have actually entered your labor market, so that would actually narrow off. But when you look at the expanded definition, for example, you can see that the discouraged work seekers have increased by 62,000. So that's a big jump. And previously we were sitting at 2.8 million persons. Now we are sitting at 2.9 million persons. And as such, this accounts for an increase that we see in the expanded definition. Mfuneko, in relation to the provinces do show different behaviors from time to time. If you look at generally, your Eastern Cape has always led the pack in relation to unemployment throughout and consistently so. But when we come to your Eastern Cape, Free State, Mpumalanga, and Gauteng, they do not necessarily show similar characteristics, because there are times when you find that Gauteng drops below the national average. But you can expect that when people are moving in the country, the first place where they want to go and look for employment is in Gauteng, which generally differs from your Eastern Cape, Free State, and Mpumalanga, which are your generally rural provinces. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take another question.
Thanks, Qiniso from Creative Qiniso. My question is that, is the survey aware that in these days there's an increase of self-employed people? Taking for instance that, where have you grouped the self-employed people, like, for example, like athletes, people like, yes, business people, and the other self-employed activities, because those people they are doing their activities as professional. They got paid where they worked. So where have you grouped these people in this survey, and do they have an impact? Or some people, even though they lose employment, but tomorrow they wake up being business people or being self-employed, or for instance, they may resign to become some certain activities and they get paid from that. So my question is that the survey have aware that there are those people, and they are growing these times than before.
Okay, the embargo is lifted. We'll take another question if there is. Embargo is lifted. Do we have a question on the floor? Cape Town, are there any questions? Back to the panel.
Thank you, Qiniso. I will answer the simpler part of the question, and I'll leave the difficult part to my colleagues here. When we look at employment figures, we look at everyone who's employed, whether they've been employed by somebody else or they are self-employed. We look at that because they are gainfully employed. But certainly there is a way in which we look at that in terms of the hours and everything, and my colleagues will deal with that.
Yes, Qiniso. We do capture the people who are working for themselves, and if you look at the report on page 63, on table 3.6, we have a category that we call own account workers, which is people who are working for themselves and they don't employ anyone. And quarter on quarter, we have seen a decline, actually, in that category of 19,000. We haven't seen any growth in that category. Thanks.
Okay, we'll take the last round of questions if there are any. Provincial.
Have you seen the effects of immigration filter through on the unemployment data? Thank you.
You noted?
Lindley again from Business Day. Could you just help me understand? So this is the first. You know, I think it's the first time that unemployment hasn't fallen in the fourth quarter since 2008. Could you elaborate on why you think this is the case?
Back to the panel.
I will deal with the first one on immigration. The role of the statistician general is to account for everyone who is within the borders of South Africa. Because these are sample surveys. When we do our sample designs, which are random and representative, you do not know when you are a field worker that when you go to that dwelling unit, the household that you will find there is coming out of immigration or they are South African citizens. You do not even know whether they are there legally or illegally if they are immigrants. And the job of the statistician is to count everyone within the borders of South Africa. Having said so, we are not encouraging illegality, but our job is to measure independently. And those who worry about these kinds of issues of law enforcement, they deal with those issues. And we don't go around when we collect information and say we have seen a lot more people out there who are illegal. It's not our job. Otherwise, people won't give us information, and yet they need services. Having said that, we have, every 5 years, we do look at immigration and people who were not born in South Africa. In November, and not in November, in 2017, we had actually released the QLFS where we had included a module that accounts for immigration. And then we ask questions about whether the people were born here in South Africa or not. Some of them were not born here yet for whatever reason, because their parents were outside the country. So there are so many reasons. And we unpack the unemployment rate. We can readily say that out of the 14 million, slightly more than 14 million in 2017 who were employed, about 1.2 million who were employed were non-South African born people. So we can unpack even in the areas where they work. So we do that from time to time, but we don't do it like every now and then. Thanks. I see there is a follow-up before I hand over, so let me deal with this question before I hand over to deal with the second question from Business Day.
Sure, thank you. And can you also account for those who are South African born that are leaving the country as well?
The employment statistics won't account for, that is that's a migration issue. Because if they leave the country and they go to, say, Brazil or China or Britain, they will be accounted there in the employment. So we won't be able to account for them. We only account for those who are within the borders of South Africa. If they leave, they don't form part of our employment, unemployment figures, because then it would cause a lot more distortions in the numbers.
Okay, we'll take the last questions if there are any. Oh, okay.
She's going to beat us up if we don't answer.
Yes, we have seen unemployment rate remaining unchanged, and this is the first time where the unemployment rate has not increased in the fourth quarter. Usually in the fourth quarter we see an increase in employment in the trade industry, but the past fourth quarter and the 2018 fourth quarter, we have seen a decline in the trade employment, especially in the informal sector. And usually would see the unemployment rate increasing in the first quarter when those temporary employed people are laid off in the first quarter, but we haven't seen an increase in employment in the trade industry, unfortunately, for the past 2 years, fourth quarters. Fourth quarter of 2019 and fourth quarter of 2018.
Are we sorted, Business Day? Okay. Are there still any last takers? Okay. You noted?
Tebogo Tshwane from MoneyWeb. I just wanted to know, just looking forward, do you think that given the fact that we come from a year where the unemployment rate has been increasing quarter on quarter, will we sort of see growth in 2020, or perhaps as a haltage of that kind of trend that we saw in the previous year?
Okay, back to the panel.
Thank you for the question from MoneyWeb. As statisticians in official practice all over the world, we measure what has happened. We don't speculate on what will happen or forecast or do modeling to see what will happen in future. The reason for that, especially in your sensitive economic indicators, socio-economic indicators like employment and the economy, is that they are dependent and very dependent on endogenous and exogenous factors. That is what happens internally and externally. And they can suffer shocks at any given moment. And if that is the case, assume we're to speculate and something happens. Look at what happened in the transport sector the other time when there was a banning of trucks on the N3 and then and issues of economy and employment were being affected. We would not have foreseen that, so we would not be able to speculate upfront. So we are like a rear view mirror when you are driving your vehicle. It keeps you confident on the road, knowing what is happening behind you while you are looking forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, SG. I suppose, SG, it's safe that we can call it the day. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for making time to attend the press conference. Those who wish to further engage the SG and the panel, they're more than welcome to do so. I thank you.